Are there other habitable planets in the
Almost
universe?
certainly yes. The answer is almost certainly yes. And the reason for that is the following. We already know by looking with powerful telescopes that people have discovered about 10,000 planets, between 5 and 10,000 planets around other stars. So it's very common that planets form around stars. That's the first thing to say. Almost every star we look at where we can see close enough, they're planets. And the planets range from things like Mercury or things like Jupiter to some rocky planets that kind of look like Earth, about the right distance. Now we're only sampling the tiniest fraction of the entire universe. It's like one out of so many billions of things that we're looking at that there have to be so many more. The thing about the universe is it's really big. It's bigger than you can even imagine. And when it's so big, there's so many stars. And if planets form around most stars, some of those planets are going to be habitable. Now, does that mean there's life on those planets? That's the next question, right?
Yes.
The answer is yes, there are other habitable planets. Now, there's a problem with that. Are there habitable planets near enough to where we are to make any difference to us now or in the future? And the answer to that is maybe yes and maybe no. Maybe the most habitable planet near us is Mars. That is on the edge of being habitable by human beings. It has an atmosphere. It used to have a lot of water, that some of it's still there. Could we turn it into something we could live on? Maybe. We could what's called terraform it, turn it into a planet like Earth. If you go back to the very beginning, Earth wasn't habitable. It was a hot rock. But slowly it became habitable. Now, habitable, do you mean by habitable by human beings or habitable by any type of life?
Well, maybe any type of life. But if can animals travel farther in outer space so that because they have more oxygen, or do they have the same amount of oxygen?
Well, first of all, let me answer a question about oxygen, and then I'll answer a question about animals. Oxygen is a product of life in the atmosphere. And the reason is oxygen is very reactive with metals like iron. So almost all the oxygen in the early Earth was combined with things like metal or silicon to make sand. So there was almost no free oxygen. And the way we got oxygen in our atmosphere is for 2 billion years, bacteria and other organisms, later green blue algae and other organisms, slowly converted the oxygen that was bound up in other metals into free oxygen in the air. And you can be almost guaranteed that if there's oxygen in the atmosphere, that there's life that's putting it there. Because all by itself, oxygen just combines with things and isn't there. For example, what does a plant do? It takes carbon dioxide and converts it into oxygen. It breathes in carbon dioxide and breathes out oxygen. That's why we get our oxygen from plants. Half of it comes from tree plants and half of it comes from plankton in the sea. So plankton is small creatures. So half of the world's oxygen in the atmosphere comes from the ocean, half comes from trees. So that's the first question. Most planets don't have much oxygen because they don't have much life, the ones we see around us. So if you find oxygen in the atmosphere, it's almost a sure sign of life. Second, can animals travel through outer space? The answer is no, not an animal. But that doesn't mean living organisms can. You know what a spore is?
No.
A spore is a For example, if you have bacteria growing or you have some fungi growing, they can produce a version of themselves, which is like a hibernation. It's very small and is really tough. It's like if the bacteria gets into trouble and it senses there's not enough oxygen or water or heat, it's too hot, it turns itself into a spore. And in that form, it's really tough. It can withstand and it can live long, long times, maybe thousands, tens of thousands of years. And it can probably travel through space. So there's an idea that life actually began on Mars. An asteroid hit Mars. There were spores that spread out and eventually landed in Earth. That's one version of how life on Earth started. But then that goes back to the question, well, then how did life on Mars start? The answer is animals can't, but spores might.